economic depression, and let's say, so what was the employment situation, let's say in the 1920s, generally at that point?
Okay, I was able to find this type of information. The unemployment rate in 1929, before the stock market crash, was 3%.
Right.
By 1933, it was 25%.
Right.
Actually, it was from other sources I've read, it was more than that.
Right.
It was close to a third, 25 to 30%.
Right.
And that was sort of the worst of the whole thing.
That was rock bottom.
By the mid 1930s, you think of that film Grapes of Wrath,
right,
with Henry Fonda, the farms
dust
are drying
bowl
up,
and all drying up, right.
and they just got to go and they hit the road and things like that.
Sure.
That's the story most people, even they still read that book in schools, so it's familiar to quite a few people. By 1940, the unemployment is 15. It's sort of bouncing back a little bit. So what I looked into was, what was that all about? And it really has to do with the stock market of the 1920s. It was a time of extreme economic optimism and speculation to the point that what they call the margin that you would have to put down to buy the stock was lowered from 90% to 10%. So everybody jumped into the stock market, and they were what they called paper millionaires. And that was, that big glitzy time, the jazz age of the 20s. Everybody was living it up because they were all wealthy on paper.
Right.
Now what happened is by the 1920s, certain things happened along the way, and somebody tried to call in some of these debts. And unfortunately, the money wasn't available, because what was happening is, in those days, the banks, independent banks, were investing their capital, the assets of savings accounts, into the market themselves. So they were called for the margin, it was called a margin call. In other words, the margin went up to 20 and 30 and 50. Right. So you'd have to keep paying it to keep the stock. Right. And they wanted to keep the stock because there was value. Mm-hmm. And but as the value of the stock, particular one dropped down, they kept having to throw more and more money after that particular stock. And what happened is, altogether, when it just came to a head in that 1 week in October 1929, it basically collapsed. That is, that the debt just there was no money left.
Right.
There was no money left to pay for the stock.
Sure.
And the fact is that it turns out that the debt was astronomically greater than the amount of money in the country at that time. The actual currency, there wasn't enough money to pay all of this debt. And that essentially led, immediately what happened is, the people would come into the bank. I want to take my savings out. There was no safety, what do you call it?
The FDIC.
Yeah,
right.
Federal Deposit Insurance.
FDIC.
It didn't exist in those days.
Right. Sure, there was no Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation.
So you come into the bank, and there's the great, I'm the teller. I'm sorry that we don't have the money. And you say, well, when will you have the money? Well, it doesn't look too good. And as a matter of fact, we're going to close the bank. And that's actually what they did. They closed the doors. The runs on the banks led to having them not able to operate because they had no money.
So you wonder, is there a parallel to this?
No, the result, this is what led to the unemployment.
Right.
Because the businesses now had no credit.
Sure.
They had no capital to do anything.
Right.
Basically, they had to fire people because they couldn't pay them. They couldn't even buy the supplies. There was no money. And this is really what, and again, back to the Grapes of Wrath.
Sure, they had there was no means to extend credit beyond their need, because the banks
right.
were the credit.
That's
it.
Right.
There was
nothing to base it on.
There were no credit cards.
And the currency was still pretty much based on real metals, like silver and gold and
right.
And
gold
things
was
like
the standard
that.
at that point.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons they went off the gold standard and went into the Federal Reserve system.
Right. Well, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was until the Nixon years is when we actually went off the gold standard as to support it out.
That's true.
That's how long it was still. I think that was one of the reasons why it stayed so long, because the one thing you knew that was not only backing the American green was that there was gold backing it up. But unfortunately, after when Nixon pulled that off, now you can see all we do is we just write paper.
Well, we create more debt.
Right, and every day we're creating more debt, exactly. So there is a parallel, because you almost look at the dot-com explosion that we had here just maybe 10 years ago.
In reading into the 1920s, again, it was this belief of unlimited prosperity. The times were basically good after World War I in this country, similar to after World War II. And unfortunately, it's more psychology than economics. People somehow believe I'll just continue to get more and more money and buy more things and become richer and richer. And then the rich mania takes over. Everybody wants to be rich. I think we just went through that in the 1990s
Right.
and a little bit in the 1980s.
Well, because
you turn on the TV and the radio, that's all you talk about.
Sure.
You know, everybody talk about money.
Sure, look at the escalation
And-
just in values of homes. They
Yeah.
went from, in 3 years, they almost doubled in value. And in 7
Oh,
years,
sure.
they tripled in
Yeah.
value. It was, and everybody was buying homes.
There
and
you go.
They could care less what the
That's
asking
right.
price was.
Unfortunately, it's such an important thing as a home, as an asset to most families.
Sure, sure.
And that's sort of why we're in the difficulty that we're in now. But the reality is that, especially in American history, it's a matter of ups and downs. You know, the graph goes like this.
Of course. Well,
And-
the pendulum swings. There's an increase and then it pulls
And,
back.
you know, they say the smart people get out before it collapses, but unfortunately, smart people are just as much into this as everybody else. It's more, again, psychology, I think, than
Well, look
than
at the
reality of
Madoff
things.
Ponzi scheme. You know, I mean, it wasn't poor people
Yeah.
getting suckered in.
Yeah,
There
it's
were
true.
very, very rich
Yeah.
people and ultra rich people getting suckered.
So what I tried to find, say in the 1930s, locally, what was going on. And what was going on is because there was no credit, there was no capital, we have headlines like this. We can just sort of read them on the camera, I suppose. Here, salaries of police and firemen reduced 5% starting now.
Wow.
1933, that's an interesting headline, starting right now. Property owners' demands hold up. So the civic employees take pay cuts. Teachers and employees asked to return 4% of salary.
Hold that up into in front of the camera.
Well, these are some of the news articles of the mid-1930s. Essentially, you know, because the money wasn't there, here's about the local Peekskill budget. Here they're cutting back on almost everything that they can. The schedule of municipal expenses, the present year, see, they're cutting. They cut 15,000 from the year before.
And look at the total budget for 1933, 180,840. And
It's almost humorous,
Look at this,
isn't
and
it?
they even put 12 cents. I mean, down to the penny.
But also what happened is because, you know, like these people, they were lucky to have jobs.
Sure.
A lot of people just lost everything. They had to feed their families. And that's where this thing of relief projects came into the picture. And, you know, FDR had his larger programs, but it happened locally as well. For example, down in Blue Mountain Reservation, here's an article in the paper here. 200 single men may be put to work at $30 a month at Blue Mountain.
Put that up in the fan. Oh, yeah, look at that.
And
So they literally, I mean, they would go out and actually hire people just to put them to work in a sense, for whatever they could find, whatever they could muster up.
well, yeah. Again, they needed some kind of income, and also they were doing useful things. In Peekskill, there was a committee called the Unemployment Relief Committee, and here they specified everything that you know what they could do. Some of the news articles around that time, you know, how desperate were people? For example, a soup kitchen was opened for single men and women.
Which we have right now.
The
in downtown
Relief
Peekskill right
Bureau
now.
will serve food at 566 South Street twice daily. So on and so on. So here you go. You had a soup kitchen in Peekskill.
Well, right now we have that the Sunny Breakfast program in Peekskill. We have
Yes,
the Jam
that's
Peak
true.
Shelter. You know, what goes around
Yeah,
comes
the,
around. It doesn't seem to. You know, people seem to
897
forget.
needy persons aided by associated charities here. Well, this is just, you know, some of the 9 vagrants arraigned today. 9 men, none of whom claimed that they ever visited Peekskill before, were arraigned before Judge Samuel Pines. Pines warned the men that Peekskill was not conducting a free hotel and asked them to broadcast the word to their friends that they would not stop in Peekskill for lodgings. In other words, that idea of just moving people along.
John, I hate to say it, it's already half an hour has gone by. Once again, you've proved an unbelievable guest. I got to bring you
And
back
you're cutting me
on
off
again.
on one of the most interesting parts, and that's the prohibition
It's
of
okay.
alcohol.
We'll circle that for next time. So, John, thank you. So, once again, we thank everybody. Don't forget, you can see the Volpe Report on Channel 74 in the Putnam Valley, Yorktown area, Wednesdays at 6 p.m., and in the Peekskill, Cortland area, Channel 15, Thursday nights at 8 o'clock. Please contact me, email me at the Volpe Report. And thank you once again. Have a good night, all.
The plains of Texas, from sea to shining sea, from Detroit down to Houston, and New York to LA, where there's pride in every American.